What's up, everybody? Welcome to the video. Chris Pennell here. We're going my core plays for week 8 of the NFL season for DraftKings and FanDuel. We'll be going position by position, breaking down cash games and going over stacks for tournaments. We'll try to build a lineup as we progress through this, more so for a single entry type build. Then at the end, I'll run my optimizer to see who's populating the most as of right now. If that sounds good to you, do me a favor. Make sure you leave a like down below, subscribe to the channel for brand new, and let's dive right into it. And as always, we'll start with the quarterback position, and we'll go over cash games first. And I don't really think there's a standout cash game quarterback this weekend. Last week I was thinking it's either going to be Jaden Daniels or Geno Smith. Unfortunately, Jaden Daniels, like a couple of other kind of like cash game staples last weekend, just a disappearing act. It wasn't his fault, he got hurt, but he ended up going out after the first series. I believe the Commanders still end up crushing with Marcus Mariota. Would have loved to see what Daniels could have done in that situation, just in a full game scenario. Then we lost Juju Smith-Schuster right off the bat, and then Jordan Whittington, who I'm sure a lot of you ended up playing with the news that Cooper Kupp wasn't going to be playing last weekend. He gets deemed active, never sees the field, and then the Rams kind of troll us again last night where they say Puka's not going to be very active. The Vegas props had him pretty low as well, I believe right around 29.5, 30.5 yards. Ends up just pretty much being full on Puka, so Rams are kind of an untrustworthy team out there, but hopefully you don't have many landmines this week. I'm sure it's going to happen. Obviously we don't know who it's going to be, but yeah, quite a few whammies last weekend. But if I am playing cash games and I'm looking for a cash game quarterback, it doesn't sound great, but I do think Bo Nix might be our best option. I'm currently projecting him to be the highest owned quarterback of the group here, which feels kind of weird to say, but they do have a 26.5 implied team total. They're playing at home, and the Panthers have been a disaster defensively this season, whether it's versus the pass or versus the run, and pretty healthy total for the Denver Broncos. We don't typically see them at a 26.5. I guess only concern here would be is that they're 11-point favorites, so maybe they have to take their foot off the gas, which sounds weird for the Broncos offense. But I still think he's a pretty safe option, and he runs the ball quite a bit. I know he's not Lamar Jackson, but we're averaging nearly 7 rushing attempts per game. Lamar Jackson's at 10, also nearly 40 rushing yards and 0.4 rushing touchdowns. Like I said, it's not Lamar Nix, but his numbers rushing-wise are not terribly far off, especially when you factor in he's about $4,000 or $3,000 cheaper here. So I think Bo Nix is a fine option, and the floor is actually solid. Obviously, we can't expect too much in the passing game from him. He's averaging less than 200 passing yards per game, but I do think at his price point, he should be okay. I also don't mind Geno here versus Buffalo. Pretty low implied team total for the Seahawks this week. We're playing at home, and I do kind of like that game, and I feel like their total should be a bit higher. 46 point over-under in that game. I still like Geno, but I'm a little concerned about the lower total this weekend. Outside of that, there's nothing really that stands out too much for me. Trevor Lawrence in that somewhat high-scoring projected game at 49 points. There's not really that many high-scoring projected games this week. It's not like we have a 52 like we did the previous week, so not a whole lot to love here. If you look at the quarterback sheet here, we can go specifically just by ownership projection. These are going to change by the time Sunday rolls around, so don't get too married to these, but Bo Nix at the top of the board, Trevor Lawrence, Geno Smith. So it looks like the cheaper quarterbacks are probably going to get more ownership this week, so we can afford guys like Tyreek Hill, Breece Hall, because I don't think the expensive quarterbacks really stand out too much. So I could definitely see that a way to go. And if we're talking tournaments, because cash games are pretty boring to talk about, but it looks like cheaper quarterbacks will be the route most people will go. But we have GPPs here. I'm only looking at the teams that I want to talk about. Obviously, I might be missing one that you might like, and that's totally fine. We're not going to agree on everything. But up top here, we have this Green Bay and Jacksonville game, and none of these teams are overly expensive. Green Bay's price tag, which is the highest one we're going to talk about overall, comes in below 6K, and the projections do look pretty solid across the board here. The only problem with stacking Green Bay is that it's a bit of a guessing game on where the ball is going to go through the air. And it's not because there's a lack of options and you just have no idea. It's because there's quite a few good options and it just gets spread around so much. Jordan Love, I mean, the passing touchdown upside is there every single week, one of the best in the entire league. We have Christian Watson, Romeo Doubs, Jaden Reed, Tucker Kraft to get the ball to. I believe Josh Jacobs had his first receiving touchdown ever last week, if I remember correctly. And if we're looking at the projections here for Green Bay, we have Jordan Love at 21 points, Jaden Reed at 16.8, Doubs at 13.3, Watson at 10.7. You also have Wicks on there as well, and Tucker Kraft. So pretty loaded offense. Just the kind of a issue is it's not that condensed. So you don't really know where the ball is going. But projection-wise, they do look solid. I don't think the ownership will be too crazy. It's obviously a very beatable matchup versus Jacksonville. I am not overly interested in Baltimore stacks this week. If I am playing Baltimore, probably just Derrick Henry and Lamar Jackson. I'm not a big fan of it. Obviously, with their 27.5 implied team total, by all means, they should score a lot of points, but kind of just the two guys that I'm interested in on that offense. Lamar Jackson does lead the way projection-wise at quarterbacks this week, and I believe Derrick Henry is at the top. It's either him or Breece Hall, I believe, for me. Pretty close on a couple of guys. So I think running back is very spread out this weekend. Seattle is not looking like they're going to get too much ownership. I do think Geno will get a little bit just because he's a cheaper, viable quarterback. We'll have to see the status on DK Metcalf officially, because if he happened to be out, obviously that would be a bit of a downgrade for Geno, considering losing your top dog is never going to help things out. But if he happened to be out, that'd be a bump to Lockett and JSM. I don't believe by the time I'm recording this, I have seen an official update. So that'll be TBT. I do think the Houston Texans are probably one of our best tournament stacks of the entire week. This is a very beatable Colts defense. No Nico Collins, so once again, we're still kind of condensed on where the ball is going to go. It's pretty much Joe Mixon, Stephon Diggs, Tank Dell. You can also add in Dalton Schultz. When Nico Collins is out, he does get a bit of a bump. But I really like this Texans offense this week in tournaments. I think Joe Mixon's a fine cash game running back, but overall, I do think they are in a pretty good spot here. 45-point over-under, which isn't amazing, obviously, with Anthony Richardson under center. The Colts offense kind of anemic. I wish Joe Flacco as the quarterback this game would be absolute fireworks, but pretty good spot there. The Cincinnati Bengals, Joe Burrow is extremely cheap on FanDuel. I believe he's $7,700, which if you're not too familiar with FanDuel pricing, that is very cheap. We see the most expensive quarterbacks like above $9,000, close to $10,000. So a bit of a price discount over there, and I like this spot. Versus Philly, they haven't been that bad versus the past this year, but this Bengals offense at home, 48-point over-under, 3-point spread. I do want pieces of this game, and if you're looking at the projection stack across the board here, very healthy numbers for quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight end, and quarterback, wide receiver. You have Jamar Chase, T. Higgins. I mean, it's really hard to beat that. I love the price on T. Higgins this week. I think he's one of the best wide receiver plays of the entire week. I am not seeing Atlanta get too much buzz this weekend, and I do prefer Kirk Cousins at home in domes. But this is a very beatable Tampa Bay Buccaneers pass defense, and we don't have any injuries for the Falcons, unlike Tampa. If Mike Evans and Chris Godwin were playing, I think a lot of people would say this is probably our game of the week. Unfortunately, with them being out, it does hurt the game a little bit, but at the same time, it makes this game so much easier to stack up. Now, we can't expect the same production from these backup wide receivers like Trey McMillan, or Jalen McMillan, whatever it is, Trey Palmer, and then Sterling Shepard, Cade Otton, but that's a very easy game to stack up. Because if you are stacking Atlanta, obviously if Kirk Cousins, you probably want to get two pass catchers with them, whether that be Drake London or Aaron McLeod, Darnell Mooney, Kyle Pitts, all viable options, even Bijan Robinson. Then run it back with one of those cheap wide receivers or cheap tight end. It looked like we were going to lose Bucky Irving for the week, but he's going to end up playing. But overall, very cheap run back options there that I think make plenty of sense. Chicago, not a lot of interest in Chicago. I do think Caleb Williams is a somewhat decent quarterback to use this week, and obviously he's got fine pass catching options, whether it be Rome Odunze, Keenan Allen, who got a couple of touchdowns in London, I believe, and then obviously DJ Moore. Like, I'm okay with stacks with that. It's not my first choice. Washington hasn't been as bad versus quarterbacks this year as they have been in seasons past, but we're still dealing with a smaller sample size. I still don't hate Chicago here. I would prefer if Jaden Daniels plays, so this game could be a bit of a shootout, but we'll see what happens. Jacksonville on the opposite side of this Green Bay game, just cheaper overall, 23.5 implied team total, 4-point dogs. They are going to be playing at home. Trevor Lawrence looks like one of the better QB options to use this week, which sounds terrifying to say, but I think cheap quarterback is going to be a route a lot of people will go, and it does make sense and pretty clear stacking options here, whether it's Brian Thomas, Christian Kirk, Gabe Davis would be a bit of a Hail Mary. Evan Ingram's been heavily involved in his return, so I like pretty much everybody here. Miami with Tua, a lot of interest here. Pretty cheap overall. Like, these guys are not priced with Tua being back. Tua is at a somewhat fair price point of $6,100. Like, he should probably be a little bit more expensive, but Tyreek Hill is cheap. Jalen Waddle is cheap. Devonta Chan is, I believe, $6,200. Now, if we just pull up their projections here, I mean, we have Tua at 16.9, which is not amazing, but a Chan at 17.7, Tyreek Hill at 20.6, Waddle at 14.8. These guys are just underpriced for Tua in the offense. We'll definitely have a lot of exposure to Miami. Beatable matchup versus Arizona at home. Tampa, where you talked about, you're just looking at the cheap guys. And then Denver. I don't really want to stack with Bo Nix. He will have ownership this week. So the one way you can get different is I think a lot of people will play Bo Nix, but probably not too many pass catchers with them. So just throwing in a Courtland Sutton or whoever else you want to is a viable way to go. Because Javonte Williams will get ownership too. So if you just want to do a double stack or something with Bo Nix, it'll make you different, but I'll be honest, they don't project that great. All right, moving over to the build here, we got to select the quarterback, and there was a lot we talked about, and I think all are viable options. But let's have some fun here. I'm really liking these Miami stacks this week. They're at home. I know Tua is just back from another concussion, so hopefully he doesn't get some scrambled egg brain once again this weekend. If he doesn't, 6,100 just seems too cheap to me. All right, moving over to running backs, I think it's kind of wide open this week. I don't think there's just really like one major standout place, and I think there's guys that are a bit above the rest, but I wouldn't say there's just like one guy that you absolutely have to play. I think in cash games, if you are spending up above $7,000, Breece Hall will probably be the most popular option. He's one of my top projected running backs of the entire week. Pretty good spot here versus New England Patriots. They're 7-point favorites. They're not at home, but a pretty fair implied team total, and his floor is just high because of the involvement in the passing game. We're talking over 6 targets per game this year, 4.5 catches, close to a 17% target share. Love the price tag on FanDuel more than I do on DraftKings, but still one of my top options overall. Then outside of that, it's kind of a guessing game on where the ownership may lie. I do think Kareem Hunt at $6,300 on DraftKings will get some ownership. They're 9.5-point favorites. Once again, not at home, but a really nice implied team total. And it's a small sample size, but since he's been the RB1 of this offense, 21 rushing attempts per game, 2 targets, that's 23 opportunities, and averaging a rushing touchdown per game. And I don't see why the volume is going to go away. On FanDuel, a bit tougher at that price point, but still nonetheless, I think a fantastic play. And then also Devon Chan at $6,200. Personally, for me, I have the passing attack in my lineup, and while Devon Chan is involved in the passing game, I am more than likely going to go double wide receiver with Tua. But in lineups, I don't have that specific type of roster construction. I would like to get a lot of exposure to a Chan. I mean, obviously, he's been kind of hindered. 3.7 yards per carry and just an abysmal offense, but Tua being back will ascend everybody, and it's a great spot versus the Cardinals. And Javonte Williams, another guy that I think will get quite a bit of ownership, especially over on FanDuel. He is dirt cheap over there. Should be the highest on running back. If not, it'll be Breece Hall, but I think that's going to be 1 and 2. But 11-point favor here, 26.5 implied team total, and the Panthers have just been a disaster versus running backs this year, allowing the most fantasy points per game. He's averaging 15 opportunities per game, and great game versus the New Orleans Saints, so no reason really not to like him, especially over on FanDuel with that really low price point. Outside of that, we're just looking at guys that give volume. I think Joe Mixon's a great tournament play. I like the Texans offense in general. I like the passing game, but I also like the run game here. 5-point favorites at home, and the Colts have been bottom half versus running backs, allowing over 120 rushing yards per game. Derrick Henry, if you can afford him, I mean, the dude's just been an absolute machine this year. You even got off to a slow start on Monday night and then just ripped off an extremely long run, almost took it to the house, but we're talking 6.5 yards per carry this year. Tougher matchup versus the Browns, but they're 8-point favorites with the highest implied team total of the week. So once again, Derrick Henry will probably fall into the end zone. He's minus 335, I believe, on most books, which equates to around roughly 70-ish% implied probability, which I don't think anyone should be surprised about. Kenneth Walker, a lower implied team total for Seattle here, but they're still at home, and Buffalo has also just been really bad versus running backs. Love the price tag on FanDuel, so if I'm playing Kenneth Walker, it's probably more so on FanDuel than it is on DraftKings this week for me personally. We talked about Breece, Bijan Robinson. He's more of a DraftKings play than I think on FanDuel, just looking at the price difference there, but Tampa Bay has not been that great versus running backs, and I just like this entire game in general, really. So Bijan, I mean, we're getting close to 20 opportunities per game. He's the one in the passing game. I don't see a reason not to like him. I do think J.K. Dobbins will pick up ownership this week at $6,900. He's a 7-point favorite at home versus the Saints, who have been not that great versus running backs this year, allowing 28 points per game to the position. I just don't really love the Chargers offense, but I am fine picking on the Saints, averaging roughly 90 total yards, which I believe his rushing and receiving yards prop is at 90.5 this week, 91.5. So, I mean, that's fair at his price point. It's not like a complete standout play because there's so many similar plays, so I can't really say one guy is really above the rest, but they just all look solid. Josh Jacobs, high implied team total, good matchup versus Jacksonville. Like, once again, these guys just all look the same. Travis Etienne will be a big question mark. He is currently a game time decision. If he is out, Tank Bigsby just goes right up there with them all, where his total yards prop is probably going to be anywhere from like around 90-ish yards. Great game in London. So it just comes down to the update on Travis Etienne if he is in or out. DeAndre Swift's a fine tournament option versus Washington, but like Chicago is grading out somewhat fair, but it's still below the rest. But I do think they're tournament worthy, is why I have them on the list. And Swift is averaging close to 20 opportunities per game. And at that price point, that's not really something you could ignore, in my opinion. And with Bucky Irving being back, it looks like it does take a hit to Rachaad White. But even when all 3 running backs were healthy on Monday night, Rachaad White was still heavily involved. I know they were trailing, so he was using the passing game, got a couple of receiving touchdowns. But I don't think they're going to get blown out here. At least I would think. And when you take Mike Evans and Chris Godwin off the field, the targets have to go somewhere. I don't think they're all going to specifically go to these lower end wide receivers. So we could just see some more checkdowns to Rachaad White, who is the main receiving back in that offense. All right, let's grab a couple of running backs. I don't think I'm going to be able to spend up because while Tyreek Hill is not overly expensive, it's not like he's free. But we do have some other cheap wide receivers we can plug in. So I don't think we have to be too price conscientious, but we will see. Let's roll with Breece Hall here at $7,300. I think we'll be able to afford him. And then we'll just go a bit cheaper here. Really like Javonte Williams, like a couple of these guys. I really like Kareem Hunt. So plug in Kareem here at $6,300 and we'll see if it fits, but we'll move on to wide receiver. And I usually don't say too much about wide receivers because, as I always say, I hate to keep saying it, but you never know, someone new here. We try to keep this as simple as possible. We want to correlate our lineups as best as we can. Like since I have Tua, like sure, Jamar Chase is a great play this week, but Tua's not scoring points without his pass catchers. It's just not going to happen. He's definitely not going to run the ball now. At least I don't think so. I'd hope not. But he needs help to score fantasy points. So how is he scoring fantasy points? Well, Tyreek Hill is usually the number one option for that. He's only $7,000 this week. We also have Jalen Waddle down there, I believe, all the way at $5,400. I mean, I know their season numbers don't look good anymore because they had to experience Tyler Huntley, Skylar Thompson, and I believe Tim Boyle for a little bit. Like, yeah, it doesn't look great, but they're very underpriced. If we're talking about cash games, though, so just keep that in mind. Like, if I have Kirk Cousins needs points, and how is he going to score points? Well, Drake London, that's how he scores points. So we try to correlate our lineups. But cash games, we're not necessarily looking to do that. Tyreek Hill is the number one cash game wide receiver for me this week at $7,000 for reasons I mentioned many, many times. Don't think I really need to go back over that. Also really like T. Higgins in the mid-range, $6,500. Brian Thomas, $6,400. All excellent plays, I think, in cash. And if we're looking to spend down to save some money, take your pick at any of the Bucs wide receivers. For me personally, McMillan is my favorite at $3,700. But after that, Sterling Shepard, Trey Palmer, I don't think it's going to be too much of a difference. Sterling Shepard should kind of fill in that Chris Godwin role as a slot possession type wide receiver. He's not nearly as good, but I do think there's at least a bit of a floor with Sterling Shepard. He's also a former teammate in college with Baker Mayfield, so I guess there's already a bit of a connection there. But for me personally, McMillan would be my favorite, but not by much. We also have options like Cedric Tillman. Jameis Winston's going to be under center, which I guess is going to be an upgrade for Cleveland. They also changed their play caller to Dorsey this week, so we'll see what they have dialed up. 17.5 implied team total, though, so there's not a ton to be excited about. But with no Amari Cooper, Tillman has definitely seen his role increase. Tim Patrick with no Jameson Williams. I think he can slide to that wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3 role, him and Khalif Raymond, so that's a bit of a bump. But outside of that, we are basically just trying to look at tournament options to stack with our quarterbacks. I do want to mention, earlier I said if DK Metcalf happens to be out, but while I was recording, he did get listed as doubtful. So since he is out, that's a downgrade for Geno Smith. Really, it's a downgrade for the entire offense, but it is an upgrade, like for fantasy purposes, for JSN and Tyler Lockett. So they get a bit of a bump there, but it does kind of kill my interest a little bit on Seattle in general, but it does increase the target share for a couple of guys, and maybe we see Kenneth Walker get a bump in targets just off a couple of dump offs maybe. All right, this should be pretty easy. I have Tua. I want 2 pass catchers with him. Who does he throw the ball to the most? That would be Tyreek Hill, and then Jalen Waddle down here at $5,400 and move on to tight end. And it's really just a game of how much Cade Otton is too much Cade Otton, because everybody is going to play Cade Otton this week. You take 2 wide receivers off the field that can handle roughly 30% target share. Well, the ball is going to go somewhere, and Cade Otton is most likely going to be that guy. I would not surprise me if he led the team in targets. We will see what ends up happening, but either way, he'll be heavily involved in this offense. He's $3,500. I don't really see a reason not to play him. Obviously, ownership in tournaments is going to be a bit of a concern. You can still play him and get different in your lineups elsewhere. In cash games, like, yeah, he's a cash game lock. Whether he succeeds or doesn't, I mean, on paper, this is the guy to get to in cash. I do want to mention on FanDuel, I have Dalton Kincaid on here strictly because of that. Like on DraftKings, I don't really have much interest at all. But he is minimum price on FanDuel. I don't know what happened. He's the same price as guys like O'Keefe and whatnot. Someone slipped a finger or something. I don't know. Should even $5,000, $6,000? I don't really know. But take advantage of that on FanDuel because it really opens up your lineup. And the difference between his projections and pretty much everybody else here is very minimal. So when you can get him at minimum price, I see no reason not to go take advantage of that. Everything else, it's basically just whatever fits my lineup. Like Brock Bowers and Travis Kelce are going to be the top spend up options. But Njoku was heavily involved last week. Although we saw Deshaun Watson just blow up his ankle, he should still be heavily involved in this offense. Same with Evan Ingram. But I would really just call it more so pairing up with my quarterbacks if possible. Will Disley is a fine cash game option too, but I mean, if you're playing cash, you really should just get the Kate Otten. Okay, let's finish this off here. I'm going to plug in a cheap defense to see what kind of money we have to work with. Right now, we have under $4,500 left for the last 4 spots, but these are cheaper positions, so salary constraints are not an issue in the slightest. I usually just play the cheapest one possible that I don't think is going to get absolutely wrecked, and sometimes these guys do get wrecked, but it's defense. It's very hard to project outside of very outlier, just really good spots. Because I don't want to spend up for defense. Like, sure, the Lions are in a good spot versus Tennessee, like Broncos, yes, but I try to save my money when possible. So for me, if Marcus Mariota happens to be the quarterback, I know he crushed the Panthers in general, everybody on the Commanders, they crushed the Panthers last week, but if Jaden Daniels is out, I mean, the Bears, I think, make the most sense at $2,700. Then we can plug in a cheaper tight end, which I think everybody wants to play Kate Otten, and I know it's going to be chalky, but we're building for single entry, not merely make your type lineups. It's okay to be a little chalky in these single entries. So we'll plug in Kate Otten. A lot of people will try to get a cheaper Tampa wide receiver. So try to avoid that, I guess. Like, obviously, they're great plays. Shepard, McMillan, Trey Palmer. But we can go a little bit different here. We can play Cedric Tillman at $3,300 versus Baltimore, who's not been that good versus wide receivers this season. Jameis Winston, under center, new offensive coordinator. Well, not a new offensive coordinator, but they're letting him call the plays this weekend, so the offense might run a little bit different. We can't expect 12 targets, but I think it's fine as an 8-9 point dog here. So we'll play Tillman. Then we have $8,400, and we can play seriously anybody we want outside of Jamar Chase. We can play St. Brown, Barkley, Derrick Henry down there, $8,100. You'd have a little bit of correlation where if you play Henry, you're expecting the Ravens to be winning, just pounding it, and then they're throwing the ball. So Cedric Tillman, that's not bad at all. Joe Mixon, I'll let you guys use your imagination, but plugging in Derrick Henry, I don't think it's a bad roster construction. We have Tua paired with Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. I don't have any run back in this stack, which I think is fine. You don't have to force that, which I don't really want to anyway. On Arizona, Trey McBride, Marvin Harrison, James Conner, but not a big fan. I think Marvin's overpriced. Breece Hall, Kareem Hunt at running back, 2 solid guys that should see around 20 opportunities and goal line work. Tillman's just cheap, but it's off the Tampa Bay cheap wide receiver chalk, which Tillman will have a little bit of ownership. I don't think it'll be as high. Eating the Kate Otten chalk there. Derrick Henry he fit. I could play anybody there if I wanted to. And the Bears defense, it's whatever. Like I said in the beginning, we're going to run the optimizer here, see which players are popping. These are Friday projections, so these can obviously change. If you guys ever do want access to all the extra stuff that I do offer, the entire NFL model, spreadsheet, stack sheet, projections, the optimizer, ownership, all that good stuff, you can get in the link down in the description or the pinned comment here. But let's throw in a couple of settings. I removed the ownership projections. Let's see. Let's just make tight end flex ineligible. And we'll do a quick stack of quarterback, wide receiver, and tight end. Of course, if you are actually doing a 20 max build, I would take more time on this, and you can do other settings if you want. But just a quick raw dog here. Nothing too crazy. I want to make sure these saved. They did. We have the 20 max to build here. So let me see which players are populating the most. And yeah, you should not be surprised to see the top 3. Kate Otten is going to be the chalk of the week. Expect extremely high ownership there. Tyreek Hill's also going to be very popular. Jalen McMillan, these guys are going to garner a lot of ownership. My projections really like Kareem Hunt. I don't think he's going to be extreme chalk, but he will have some decent ownership. Ravens, Bo Nix getting a lot of quarterback ownership. The 2 expensive running backs we talked about. Devon Chan. Yeah, mostly guys we would expect. So let's see what some of these Bo Nix lineups looks like, because you don't have to actually do this, but since we specified I want a stacking option, we have some here. So Bo Nix with Cortland Sutton getting jammed in there. Cortland Sutton, it's probably just going to mainly be Cortland Sutton. I believe Vela, if that's how you pronounce his name, was also somewhat cheap, showing value. But yeah, look at the teams here. Tampa Bay, they're going to be very chalky this week. And it's not because they're the top projected team, but value-wise, they're just going to be able to make our lineups fit this week. Miami getting a ton of ownership. Denver, KC, Baltimore. KC for me is mainly probably just Kareem Hunt. I don't really see Travis Kelce getting jammed in just because of how high owned Kate Otten is going to end up being. But yeah, everything's kind of shaping up here, so I don't really think there's too many surprises. But with that being said, that's all I got for you guys this week, so I hope you enjoyed. If you did, make sure you leave a like down below. Subscribe to the channel if you're brand new. If you guys have any questions, comments, concerns, leave them down below. I'm more than happy to help you out, but I wish you all the best, and I'll see you all next time.